Many thanks indeed for staying with us. Let's switch gears now and turn our attention to the war in Gaza, where at least 77 Palestinians have been killed and 250 others injured in southwest of Gaza City. According to authorities, the Israeli military attacks hit a crowd of people waiting for deliveries of food aid in the early hours of today. Bodies were seen on the ground after the attack, with rescuers unable to evacuate some people due to the danger of further Israeli strikes. But the dead and wounded have been taken to Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital. For days, residents of northern Gaza have been desperately searching for food, with many taking a long trek towards the south by foot amid growing reports of famine, malnutrition, and starvation. Meanwhile, the Hamas-run health ministry has confirmed that more than 30,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since the October 7th attack. The majority of those killed, it says, were women and children. The figures do not differentiate between civilians and fighters when identifying those killed. In its daily update earlier today, the ministry said 81 people had been killed in the last 254 hours, bringing the total to 30,035. The actual number of dead is likely to be far higher, as the count does not include those who have not reached hospitals. Among them, thousands of people still lost under the rubble of buildings hit by Israeli airstrikes. And let's get some perspective now as VOA's Linda Greinstein joins us live from Jerusalem. Linda, great to see you again. We had such an interesting conversation yesterday, but there's still so much to unpack with this very, very latest development. These figures of the number of the dead sound very similar to the one identified by the Israeli Defense Forces just yesterday. How trustworthy are the numbers from Gaza officials, and what else are you learning?
Well, it's hard to know the exact numbers because, it's very hard to get access to Gaza. In fact, the only reporters in Gaza are local Palestinians. International reporters are not allowed in. Israelis are not allowed in. That said, it does seem to be that number is correct. However, according to the Israeli side, at least 12,000 of them are fighters, while according to the Palestinian side, only about 6,000 of them are fighters. But in any case, we're talking about quite a large death toll. We're talking about thousands and thousands of women and children. It's just sort of hard to grasp how difficult, how large this number is. And as you said, there are an estimated 8,000 people buried beneath the rubble. Who haven't been, they haven't been able to get to them for weeks. And I think that this incident that we saw this morning, in which so many people were killed, again, there are different versions. The Israelis said that desperate people mobbed the trucks of aid and a lot of people got trampled. They said a preliminary investigation shows that Israel was responsible for only about 10 of the deaths, and that the soldiers opened fire after they thought that their lives were in danger and that they were about to be attacked by a mob of people. Palestinians say that Israel opened fire on this very large, crowded area, and that, as you said, more than 70 people were killed. In any case, it just shows how difficult the situation is in Gaza these days.
And they make a reference to the fact that women and children are amongst the highest number of those killed. This supposes that the Israeli targets were not Hamas militants. Has the Israeli government responded to these reports and stories?
Well, the problem is that Gaza is an incredibly densely populated area. It's one of the most densely populated areas of the world. The Gaza Strip is only 25 miles long and about 15 miles wide, and there are 2.3 million people living there. So the problem is also that Hamas has kind of embedded itself among the population. In every house, just about, Israeli troops have found weapons and other kinds of things. Hamas has a huge network of tunnels underneath the ground in which they have been living, and then they kind of pop up to attack the Israeli soldiers. But when civilians have tried to flee, in some cases, Hamas has actually stopped them from fleeing. So, Israel says it is doing everything it can to avoid civilian casualties, and that Hamas is using the civilian population as human shields.
I mean, we understand, of course, there are ongoing talks and negotiations. One of Hamas's senior officials said there was not much progress when it comes to a planned ceasefire for Monday. Is that still a possibility, as hoped by U.S. President Joe Biden?
Well, just a little while ago, Joe Biden now said he doesn't think it'll happen by Monday. Israel had earlier said that it would like to see something enforced by Ramadan, which starts on March 10th. And that's, Ramadan is always a very tense time, the Muslim holy month. It's not clear if it's going to happen or not. Hamas wants Israel to agree in advance that the war will end. Israel has agreed to a 6-week humanitarian ceasefire in exchange for the release of 40 hostages. There are about 134 hostages still being held by Hamas, although Israel says that it believes at least 30 of them are no longer alive. There is growing pressure in Israel for the hostages to be released. In fact, thousands of people are marching from Gaza to Jerusalem, families and supporters of the hostages, to try to convince the government. But that said, it still seems that there are gaps between what Israel is willing to give and what Hamas is demanding.
Linda, the United Nations is still warning of risk of famine in Gaza because of the war. We know that these are the consequences of war, of course, but it is quite unfair that innocent civilians have to bear the brunt of that. It's the idea of being careful with its targets in eliminating militants or Hamas militants at all. And just to add, the second part of my question would be, what other options are left for civilians in the Gaza Strip?
Well, the Army says it is doing everything it can to avoid civilian casualties. It says it has had these humanitarian corridors, places where people can go. One is called the Mawasi, but there aren't really any services there. What's happened is that the population has moved south to Rafah, which is the large city on the border with Egypt. Israel says that it will invade Rafah, but has promised that they will find some solution for the civilians. I find it hard to see how that can happen. Israel says it is willing to allow as much international aid in as possible. It just wants to inspect that aid first, make sure there's no weapons or anything like that. And Israel says the problem is not Israel. The problem is the United Nations does not have the correct distribution center. In addition, they say that a lot of the aid is stolen by Hamas before it can actually get to the population. So I think the international community has to do more in order to help with the distribution of aid. But I've spoken to people in Gaza in the last few days, and they say that while the situation has been difficult now for months, it's becoming really desperate, where you have people, especially children, beginning to die of malnutrition. You have disease spreading, respiratory diseases, hepatitis, and there's not really a medical system to cope with it. So the situation really is reaching a crisis point.
And allow me just perhaps bring you in on the situation with the hospitals in Gaza. Any updates with that?
Yes, I mean, there are a few hospitals that are still functioning partially, but many of the hospitals have shut down, and they don't have medicines. They don't have any machines that they need. There had been cases in the past where Israel had actually brought in incubators to save some of the premature babies, and now there are more and more reports of people who could have been saved dying because the hospitals are not equipped to do surgery or not equipped to do anything to really save their lives. So, you know, this is the time for the international community to come in and to do whatever it can to help the situation, as well as to push both Israel and Hamas towards a ceasefire.
Well, this indeed are desperate times for residents of Gaza, and very dire conditions there, especially for women and children who are helpless. And then, of course, ongoing talks and negotiations as spearheaded by leaders in Qatar. We hope that somehow a truce can be found just before the start of the holy month of Ramadan. But thank you most kindly, VOA's correspondent Linda Grandstein, live for us in Jerusalem, as always.
Thank you.